Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to today's webinar session, which is on the top 5 hacks for your social media strategy. Today's webinar is brought to you by DigiGrad and SocialBeat. So DigiGrad is an edtech initiative by SocialBeat, which is one of the topmost and also the fastest growing digital marketing agency in India. And we are in an aim to empower students, working professionals, freshers, and even entrepreneurs to build a digital marketing career by providing them various digital marketing courses and also giving them a practical learning environment. So as we all know, we are living in a digital marketing world today, and it's a booming industry. Today, we have a very special guest, Srinidhi Maheshwari. So a little to know about her. She is a media graduate from MOP Vaishnav and also a very, very familiar voice as she has worked with 104.8 Chennai FM Live and with more than 4 years of experience as a senior manager in digital marketing. Today, she's the Associate Vice President at SocialBeat. So hi, Srinidhi, welcome. And I will be handing over the session to you. And also, before we can start, I would request the audience to kindly post the questions on the comment box so we can handle those questions at the end of the session. Yes.
Thank you so much, Harshini. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here. And definitely, this is a topic that is extremely close to me. It's about top hacks of a social media strategy. I've been in this space for the last 4.5, 5 years, and it's extremely important to understand how to crack a social media strategy for various brands. No same social media strategy can sort of like be applied to all the brands. So we have to custom make it. And how do we sort of do this? And that's what we're going to be discussing today. What are the top 5 hacks that I have personally used in the last few years of my experience? And I'm happy to sort of share that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Harshini. Great. That's pretty much who I am. Currently an associate vice president at SocialBeat, like Harshini said. Okay, so with the top 5 hacks, we have divided that into 2 sections. We have divided it into research phase and experiment phase. So the first 2 hacks are going to be in the research phase, which is extremely important. And it's sort of, I would say, a one-time effort. And then it's the experiment phase that changes over a period of time. So it's extremely important for us as marketers to realize that no same hack can be used over a period of time. We can't use the same marketing strategy for a year-long effort. It has to be changed basis different times of the month, different times of the year, different months, different campaigns, etc. So the first hack definitely is to basically understand our brand and competitor research, right? So this is actually a hack that comes into play both if it's an existing brand or if it's a brand that is going to be launched, right? So if you're a brand marketer or a manager who's joined a brand recently, it's extremely important for us to understand what the brand is all about and also look at what the competitors are doing, not just in your target market, but also globally, right? So because your target segment is pretty much going to be on the similar lines, it's important to first understand what our competitors are also doing. And if you're sort of a new brand, it's extremely important to understand how do we want to position our brand and what are we going to do about it, right? So we've broken down this hack into 4 steps. So the first step is about researching about your industry itself. So let's quickly take an example. For example, FMCG product, right? So for example, let's take Lay's as an instant, which is chips. So how do we sort of like now understand about what is happening in the industry by itself and then understand how do we want to position our brand? So we read about the industry, we read about what's happening in the chip segment, what's happening in the FMCG segment, and then go about it. Now, if it's an existing brand, I'm sure we already have the brand story and the values in place, and the products are only going to be increasing over a period of time and the growth story, right? If it's a new brand, it's important for us to first establish what our brand story is going to be, what is going to be the value of our brand, what will be our products. So what are going to be our products initially when we start off? How are we planning to sort of grow the market in that sense? Who is our consumer? Who's our target audience? What will be the brand tone? What will be the brand voice of our brand, and how are we going to go about it? So it's extremely important for this step to do a lot of market research and analysis and then come up with all of this together. Not just there, but it's also important to now understand what has been happening in the past, right? So what is happening on the social media handles? So for example, with respect to social media handles, we have a different voice under the same umbrella campaign on different on different platforms, right? So we probably do different things on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, etc. So what are we doing on these social media handles? How do we leverage the different um, things that are available on this platform, right? So for example, on Instagram, how do we leverage on reels? How do we leverage on IGTV? How do we leverage on a Facebook live? For example, we're live now on YouTube, so how do we sort of like use YouTube live in that sense to leverage on our campaign, right? Content type, and what is our engagement rate, right? So once we understand who our consumer is and what's the consumer profile, we will also understand which social media handle we need to be present on, right? So it's extremely important for us to spend significant amount of time for this piece, because it's extremely important for us to understand what is our brand going to be and what are we going to stand for, right? So what is the brand story, what are our values? And it's extremely important. And a lot of brands usually just move forward, they just know what product they want to launch and then they launch the product, but that's not how it's supposed to be done. We're supposed to understand how we're going to package the product, what are we going to speak to our consumers, where is our target market, right? It's extremely important for us to know this. Now that we know what our brand is going to stand about, it's also important for us to understand what our competitors are doing. So like we were discussing chips for that matter, what are our other competitors doing, right? Like what are other people in the same industry doing? It's extremely important for us to know that. And like I mentioned earlier, it's important to just not look at it from a particular target audience. So it's not necessary for us to look at it only from the India standpoint, but what is happening from a global standpoint plays a very important role. Apart from that, it's also good to sort of like look at social media handles of various brands in other industries as well, to just look at the kind of content that they're posting. A few examples that I personally really follow is Swiggy, Dunzo, Netflix, Amazon, etc. So while I might not be in the same industry, it's fun to sort of like look at what these brands are doing, even though they're from different industries, and see how we can get inspired or sort of like get an idea from what they are posting about, right? So do follow a lot of other handles, because there is never an end of inspiration and you can always learn a lot from various other brands, and how you can sort of custom make it and tailor make it for your particular brand. So, just to summarize the first hack, I would just say that it's extremely important for us to understand our brand. If you're new to the brand, like if you're a new brand manager who's just joined the company, it's extremely important for you to also understand what the brand story, what are the values, what are the products, what is the growth story, and then go ahead and create a social media strategy. Because if you don't know what the brand is, you will not be able to create content. Always remember that the brand is also personified, right? A brand is also a person who has a particular identity. Like the brand identity plays an extremely important role. So how do you sort of like fit into the shoes of the brand, like fit into the brand identity, and then create the social media content, right? So it's extremely important for us to understand that, understand the competitors, and then go ahead and create the social media strategy, right? In case you all have any questions about this or any thoughts, please do drop it in the comment section below and we shall be able to pick it up now. So just an example, so the example is Moonlight, right? So Moonlight basically is a platform for freelancers and businesses to come together. They have already worked on their brand story and values. They know what they really stand for. But before they go into this market, they want to understand what are the other competitors doing. So it's basically a platform which is very similar to Fiverr and 99 Designs, etc. But they also want to understand how they can be different in that sense from the other competitors, right? So who is going to be the consumer, where are they going to find these consumers, and what their competitors are going to really be, right? So while we started working with them, we did an in-depth market research to understand who is going to be a consumer, where are people really going to come from, right? And after doing this, we realized that there are 4 buckets that we went after, because we realized that it's important for us to understand where we're going to get these businesses from and who the freelancers are going to be. So the first thing that you do is basically understand who is your target audience, right? So the target audience basically when it comes to businesses, because we sort of like want people to post projects on our platform, we realize that there are 4 personas, right? So the first persona is basically your owners of a large scale company, right? A 200 plus employee company, the CEO, CXO, founder, etc. So we put them in one bucket where we started trying to tell them that freelancing is the way forward. You can cut down your overhead expenses. We started talking to them about pain points, and we sort of like started speaking to them about how they can also use freelancers for their short term work or projects that they have in their company, right? While we were talking to these large enterprises, we also spoke to the HR of them with a different communication. So we spoke to them about how they could do this, and this the CEO and the CXO was only sort of like in the brand awareness stage, but the consideration and the conversion was sort of happening with the HR, because they are sort of responsible about who they need to hire in the company and how they're going to go about it, right? So we sort of like had the HR manager, the senior vice president of human resources, etc., and what we would sort of like communicate with them. Likewise, we then went down to the small businesses or startups in that sense, who basically have 1 to 200 employees, and we were then targeting both the CEO, founders, and the human resource managers to then see how they can also use freelancers and Moonlight as a platform to basically get their projects going, right? So we sort of broke it down into 4 different personas, and then reach out to them with custom communication for each of them, which is tailor made for them. And we targeted them on LinkedIn, and it did wonders. We could exactly reach out to the right target audience and have them post projects and believe in Moonlight as a platform to basically have freelancers post content, right? So that is pretty much about who the consumer profiling was. With respect to competitors, we did a bit of research. We sort of like, these are just a few competitors here. We sort of like went deep into each of them and saw what was different about them and how we could go about it, right? So while it's extremely important for us to look at competitors, we also didn't restrict ourselves from only in competitors in India, but we also looked at competitors abroad and saw what they were doing differently, right? So just it's extremely important to sort of invest the initial few months or years, I would say, to sort of like understand what is your brand all about and what are the competitors really doing, right? Great. Now that we sort of like understand what our brand really does and what it really stands for, we also need to now understand that what are we trying to achieve, right? So every company basically has a goal, and every goal basically can be short-term goal or a long-term goal, right? So your long-term goal is going to be more in the brand goal kind of stuff, like what you're looking at overall from a brand perspective, and your short-term goal is going to be more campaign specific about why are we doing this particular campaign and what are we trying to achieve from it, right? So it's important to understand the brand and campaign goal. So in this hack, what we had to do is basically understand what our goals are going to be. So we set measurable goals. With respect to measurable goals, it definitely has to be SMART, right? I'm sure all of you all know what SMART stands for: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely goals. So we ensured that each of these goals were extremely specific. We knew how we could measure them. It obviously had to be more realistic and time bound, that we knew that, okay, in 3 months or 6 months or annually, what are we going to achieve, right? So we set goals, and especially when we're looking at a social media strategy, our goals could be in with respect to the number of shares, comments, reach, engagement, followers, etc. I'm sure you all know that the number of likes or followers that you have in a particular handle is not very important. For a new brand, it might be necessary to just sort of like get that kind of goodwill that, okay, we have so many followers. Does not mean that they just amplify content and get fake followers on our profile, because that completely changes the algorithm of our profile. It's extremely important to also understand that we have the right target audience and the right audience on our platform following us for the kind of content that we're looking at, right? You can also have long-term and short-term goals, and also understand that what is important, right? So whether you're looking at a branding, what is the focus, right? Are we looking at a brand focus or are we looking at a conversion focus, right? So if your brand is extremely new, initially your focus needs to be more from the branding standpoint versus a conversion standpoint. But for example, if it's a brand that has been well established, then you know it's going to be from the conversion standpoint, right? So it's important for us to understand what are we really trying to achieve and go after that. So this is not real. This is just basically hypothetical numbers. So for example, if you were looking at Moonlight, and if they sort of like had their long-term goals and short-term goals, they would want to sort of like have 5,000 businesses register on their platform by say X month, and how many job postings they would want, and what would sort of like be the kind of revenue that they can expect from these job postings, right? To basically be able to surface 15,000 job postings, they realize that they need about 35,000 plus freelancers from different sectors, different industries on their platform. So while you have both the both the goals interconnected, it's important to sort of like add a number to it and say how many we really need, right? With respect to their short term goal, it was more with respect to brand awareness and how many likes and followers they sort of like want on their social media platform, and how many people they really wanted to reach, right? So because it was a new brand, they realized that they sort of like wanted to majorly now focus on branding. While they sort of like completed a few months, then they sort of like moved down to branding and then conversion as well, because they realized that while conversion is happening, branding will also happen. So it's important for us as brand marketeers to understand what should be the focus of the brand and sort of like work towards it, right? So this is important to sort of like set goals. This is the research phase, and you will be able to sort of like put down goals for your brand only after you've sort of like, thought about it and researched about it. So which is why this is called the research phase, and it's extremely important, it's extremely crucial. Without doing this, moving forward is extremely difficult, and we will sort of like be posting generic content that may or may not be the way that our target audience is looking at our content. Moving on to the experiment phase basically has 3 hacks. So the first hack basically in the experiment phase is about audience and platform mapping, right? So while we completely understand what our target audience is and who our target audience is, it's important for us to understand how are we going to reach them, right? How are we going to target them? How are we going to go after them and speak about our brand, right? So it's important for us to understand who our target audience is and which platform they're present in. So how do we sort of do that? It's important for us to understand which platform is for what, right? We all definitely know Facebook is very different from Instagram, and Instagram is very different from YouTube. YouTube is very different from LinkedIn. LinkedIn was very, very different from what TikTok used to be, right? And all the other platforms that are now here. So it's important for us to understand which platform has what kind of tonality and what do people really use these platforms for. What is the audience, what is the age group, what is the gender split, etc. While the gender split would largely be more or less similar on most of the platforms, because that's the internet ratio of like internet gender split itself. But it's important for us to know this. Also, with respect to audience, I personally am very different on each of these platforms, right? The kind of content that I post on Instagram is very different from the kind of content that I post on LinkedIn, right? So it's important to understand that what does this audience do? How do they sort of behave? What are their interests on each of these platforms? And what kind of content do they consume on these platforms, right? If I'm on YouTube, I'm definitely searching for videos that sort of interest me, probably long form videos or music videos, etc., because that's how I consume content. But when it is sort of on Instagram, I would sort of like want to watch quick videos, which would maximum be 15 seconds. So the kind of videos content that I consume would probably be reels right now, right? There are people who sort of like consume IGTV content as well. So it completely differs from person to person as to how do they consume their content on the platform, right? So while you have the knowledge about what platform stands for what and where your audience is or what the audience does differently on the platforms, you need to sort of like marry that together and sort of realize that which platform makes sense for what kind of audience, right? So you need to sort of now classify your audience into 2 buckets, one which is your primary bucket and your secondary bucket, right? So if you have your primary bucket, we need to now focus on which platforms and what kind of content, right? So it's extremely important for us to understand our audience and also understand the platforms that we're really looking at. Content hack number 4 is going to be content planning and creation. So now that we know which platform we're going to be posting content on and who our target audience is, it's important for us to now understand what type of content should we post on these platforms, right? What should be the content planning? What should be our content creation, right? So it's important, like if you remember the first hack where we sort of like spoke about the brand voice and the brand tonality and the brand identity, it's important for us to understand what the tonality of the particular page is going to be, right? So we need to understand the objectives and also understand that what does our brand really stand for. We can't post quirky content on one day and serious content on another, and some other type of emotional content on the third day. Yes, it's important for us to have a mixture of the kind of content bucket that we are having. It's important for us to understand that what does the brand really stand for, right? So when you take an example of Swiggy, you do realize that they are extremely quirky and witty, right? Like they do extremely fun stuff. Netflix in that sense is also extremely witty. So how do you sort of like know and fix the tonality of your particular page? Apart from that, it's also important for us to realize to make a content bucket. Basically, that includes everything that you have in the digital umbrella. So you have an umbrella campaign, which is your big campaign, which sort of like is a campaign that fits your long-term campaign goal. And how do you sort of like have sub buckets under that, right? So that's important for us to understand the options that we have and what kind of content we'd like to post. uh, Everybody would get really bored if you post the same thing every day, right? Like, so on Monday you post say motivation post, on Tuesday you post something, on Thursdays you post throwback. It becomes extremely repetitive and nobody really likes that kind of content, right? You do not want repetitive content on your social media feed, because then your engagement rate is going to go really low. So how do you sort of like have a content mix for your brand plays an extremely important role. So always remember that you should have a mix of brand centric posts, engaging content and contests, informative posts, time bound posts, occasional posts, and also trending posts, right? Posts that are trending in that particular point in time, which is moment marketing. So how do you sort of like use moment marketing to create the content that you would like to sort of like post on your handle? Apart from that, it's also important to understand that on your social media handle, you do not want to always post about your own brand and sell your product or service, because nobody is on social media platforms to basically look at your direct push of a product or service. So how do you sort of like have the same thing in a quirky way is what we need to really um, be important, right? Also, if you remember, the third hack was about audience and platform mapping. While we know that each platform is very different and the kind of content that we post on each of these platforms is extremely different, we need to sort of like understand that the content that we post on each of these channels are also supposed to be very different, right? So while you have your umbrella campaign in one place, it's important to understand how you can have different content for each of these posts, right? So that's pretty much what we're talking about. Now that we have different buckets in place, we need to let the creativity take over, understand the brand, know the objective, know your target audience, and just blend them all together, right? So if you have all of these pieces, all these four hacks in place, you can just sort of blend it together and create a content bucket that would be sensible for you all, right? So if you all have any questions here, if you all think you all are stuck with anything, please do write in the comment section and we'll take up these questions right after, like in the next 5 minutes. Uh, so for example, when we are now looking at Moonlight's content bank, right? So we realize that we have two target audiences, right? So we have one which is freelancers, the second which is businesses, and we also need to create the brand itself because it's a new brand. So we realized about how we had to sort of like have a content bank that would sort of like fit all of this, right? So for branding, we sort of use gig economy facts, we use memes, platform details, etc. We spoke about the brand itself. When we spoke about freelancers, we sort of like spoke to them about how they could make more money with the comfort of sitting at home, and also push them to sort of like register on the platform. But when we were talking to businesses, we sort of like spoke to them about how it is more economical to have like a freelancer complete a project and also register and push them to basically register and post projects on the platform, right? So we had different content buckets for different different target audiences, because we had two different clear target audiences for Moonlight. So while it was extremely challenging, we realized that we had to maintain some kind of thematic post for each of these things so that they understand whether a particular post is for a business or for a freelancer. So I have a quick example to just show you all. So the one on the left is basically replace your job with a career. So that was more talking about how you can basically have a career by being a freelancer. And we spoke about how the jobs are owned by organizations, your career is yours, stop being reliant, start moonlighting, right? The same campaign basically was done in a different way for businesses, which was register, choose, and assign. That's it. So the smallest of things that you can sort of like look on this creative. We also ensured that we basically had like a person wearing a t-shirt, which would sort of like be less formal. It's sort of like informal and look more like a freelancer when compared to the businesses. I'm not saying today startups and businesses have to wear suit or sort of like dress up like this, but it just sort of like helps with the brand identity, sort of the creative that we've used, right? So that's what we really did. And if you sort of like subtly see, we used the Moonlight's logo on both the t-shirt and the cup to just have a brand element on that, right? So we ensured that we had a circle creative and sort of like played around with that, right? Great. So while we've created the content bucket, it's important for us to have a content calendar in place. This is just an example of how your content calendar can look. Basically, you have a content calendar and you keep adding posts on what's going to go live when, so that you don't put too many posts in a particular on a particular day, and it's also spaced out very well across the entire month, right? So it's important to sort of like have a content calendar in place, and I would suggest that it's better to sort of like have a content calendar in place at towards the end of the previous month, so that you can sort of like predict what the next month is going to look like. Leave little space for moment marketing and sort of like occasional and time bound marketing, because that sort of does really well as well. This could be in another format, which is more from an Excel sheet point of view. So if you sort of like have multiple posts going live on each of the days, how do you sort of like post content accordingly, and what your campaign, which platform is going to be taken live on, and what's going to go live, right? So just have an Excel sheet, which could be a consolidated sheet of your entire content bank in one place, so that you know what's happening with your particular brand on which handle. The last and the most important hack is analysis and the learning phase, right? So this is basically an hack that has to be done after literally every campaign. So you need to analyze every campaign, every post, and realize what happened to that post, right? Did that post do well? Did that post not do well? It's extremely important to sort of like analyze and have the learning phase in check. um so this is broken down into three. The first one is basically leveraging on analytics of every platform, right? So every platform basically has their own analytics that we can sort of like leverage on and get insights on what happened to a particular post. Second is to set timelines and track accordingly, right? So you have a campaign which is sort of like going on for a week or 10 days. It's important to understand that you need to analyze the analytics during the campaign itself and right after the campaign as well, to just understand what was the impact of that particular campaign, right? So it does not make sense to sort of like say for example, March 8th is Women's Day, right? So you don't want to do a campaign for Women's Day and just look at it probably in the first week of April, when you're sort of doing a monthly report, right? So you don't want to look at a particular campaign 1 month later to then see what happened to that campaign. Ideally, I would recommend to sort of like do it right after, and also during the Women's Day campaign itself, to just see and understand what happened with that campaign. And analytics play an extremely important role. Point number three is basically address your learnings. It's important for us to basically understand what went right. So even though we might think that the campaign did extremely well, it might have probably not done well, right? So it's important for us to basically address the learnings and realize what could have possibly gone wrong or what went right. Because what we think is right might probably not be right, because the target audience is extremely different, right? For example, you might think that the brand has a particular image and can speak only in English. But if your target audience is the mass and basically understands vernacular and relates more to it, it's extremely important for us to realize that we would sort of like want to post content in different languages, so that we can reach out to the target audience with the lowest amount spent, right? So while what might not be something that you understand, if your target audience relates to it, it's extremely important for us to keep that in check. Great. So that sort of like brings us towards the end of the 5 hacks. Just to quickly summarize, the first hack is to basically understand. I just sort of like go back to the 5 hacks. So the first hack is basically to understand and understand your brand and your competitor research. Your second hack is basically understanding your brand and your campaign goal. Both these are basically part of the research phase. Then comes the experiment phase, which is hack number 3. It's extremely important for us to understand our audience and map the audience to a particular platform and map towards it. The fourth hack is basically content planning and creation. It's extremely important for us to understand what kind of content will work on which platform and how can we create it. And the hack number 5 is basically analysis and learning phase, right? So that sort of like brings us towards the end of today's session. Happy to sort of like answer any questions. Over to you, Harshini.
Okay, thank you so much, Srinidhi. That was really great. I mean, getting to know the 5 hacks that is required for your social media strategy. So we do have a couple of questions. So let me go one by one. So the first question is by Abhirami. It says, what are the social media trends in 2020 for small businesses owners who need to know that?
Okay. So with respect to the social media trends of 2020, we've sort of seen a lot of changes, especially because TikTok got banned, and we sort of like had a lot of newer platforms that came and rose, right? We also saw how Instagram quickly changed into Reels and had the same TikTok kind of videos going live on Instagram Reels itself. So it's important for us to now leverage on these kind of platforms and these kind of trends that are happening. One other thing that we really realized that is increasing and booming at an all-time high is basically influencer marketing. Influencer marketing is doing extremely well because people are sort of like relating to what another person says than the brand speaking for itself, right? So influencer marketing is sort of doing really, really well right now, and also multilingual and vernacular marketing, right? So one of my other examples that I just gave was also about how small businesses, if their target audience understands the vernacular, there is absolutely no harm, but is highly recommend to sort of like switch and have basically vernacular content integrated in your content strategy.
Right. Okay. So the next question is by Prasad, which asks, which brands can I check out for the perfect social media engagement?
Okay, so that completely depends on the kind of content you're looking at. Personally, I sort of like follow a lot of Swiggy. I follow Dunzo. I follow Netflix, Amazon Prime. I follow Social Samosa and Mad Over Marketing actually as well because they sort of like cover the latest trends and campaigns that are done by a lot of brands. I also follow Fevicol and various other brands as well, right? So you basically depends on the kind of content that you really like, but I would definitely say following Social Media Dissect, Social Samosa, Mad Over Marketing is extremely important.
Okay. So the next one is, in terms of social media engagement, which channel is better, or how would you rank for different channels?
Okay, so that does not really depend on channel. I wouldn't say that the engagement on a particular channel is higher than another channel. It actually depends on the kind of content you're posting, right? So on the same channel, I have seen basically people posting a lot of content on Instagram, but things don't go viral there. But similarly, a particular brand, if they post on Instagram itself, the engagement rate is extremely high and things go viral. Similarly, on YouTube, we have a lot of videos being uploaded on YouTube every single day, but a simple video that's taken live by, say, Carrie Minati went viral in no time, right? So it does not really depend on channel to channel, but I would basically say that it largely depends on what kind of content you're posting on the channel, right? And that can really do wonders for your brand.
Right. Okay. And adding on to that question was, how often is it mandatory to have a lot of hashtags for your particular reel or for your particular video that you're going to post?
So I wouldn't say it's important to have a lot of hashtags. There is no right or wrong in the number of hashtags that you need to post, but it's extremely important for you to use the relevant hashtags, right? So there is no point of putting hashtags like follow for follow, IG daily, etc. But posting relevant hashtags that make sense to the content you're posting can be discovered by people who are actually looking at that kind of content, right? So it's extremely important in that sense to use relevant hashtags. If you're a new brand or an existing brand, try building on a campaign hashtag that suits your brand as well. So leverage on a brand hashtag so that a few years later or a few months later, that basically becomes an identity by itself.
Okay, yes. Our next question is from Prateek Mekhe. His question is, how does social media help B2B businesses? That's his question.
So social media definitely helps B2B businesses as well, because B2B businesses, while they are having discussions with you offline, they also definitely do look up to your brand profile online. We have had a lot of instances and clients who basically have done wonders in B2B space. They have been able to onboard dealers and distributors, or also B2B market on social media platforms as well. Because even if it's B2B, at the end of it, it's a consumer, right? And that consumer basically is present on the social media platforms as well. So maybe the tonality can be very different. It may not work on Instagram, but maybe it's all works really, really well on LinkedIn. So it depends from industry to industry, sector to sector, but B2B definitely works really well on social media platforms as well.
So when you say that it's a new brand and they need to establish themselves, how often is it? How often do they have to do like an audit? Because the whole concept of the SMART analysis and even the SWOT analysis is necessary, right? So how often do they have to do to establish to get that brand loyalty and the recognition?
So I think it's extremely crucial initially, for sure. Like, it's extremely important for you to put in a lot of effort in your research phase to understand your brand itself, to do SWOT analysis, to understand what you're really strong at, what your weaknesses, etc. Also, what your competitors are really doing. But it's important, I think, at all given point in time. So, for example, a brand who has been established for a very long period of time also has to look at audit, because you never know when a new brand comes over and takes over, right? Also, the behavior and the consumption pattern of target audience changes a lot. So while you might be having a blind eye towards what your brand is really doing, it's extremely important for you to continuously keep doing audit and look at it from the target audience point of view, not from the brand point of view, but also look at it from the target audience point of view, because that is what is important.
Right. Okay. We have one more question from Pavitra. How about vernacular social media marketing for small businesses?
Oh, it's extremely important. And it's not extremely important only for small businesses, but it's extremely important for like businesses at all scale, right? So even a big brand, for example, has a target audience which can be mass, right? It can basically cater to the entire nation for that matter. It's extremely important for them to also leverage on vernacular marketing, because the next billion users on the internet are vernacular, right? Like, thanks to Geo, everybody has internet access to internet today. Not everybody understands English, but even if people understand English, they prefer consuming content in vernacular language, right? So it's extremely important to basically have content in vernacular as well.
Okay. So my one question I had was, so I think majority of the youth today is on Instagram, or they maximum use Instagram to promote anything for that matter. So I basically wanted to know, is there like any particular time that you think we have to follow, or the whole concept of there came new posts these days which spoke about the Instagram algorithm, where you need to like share the reels or share that post. Does that actually work, and does that really help people to grow, and the recognition, does it really come that way, or is it just or does it vary from each particular platform as well, was my question.
So what I would say is, each platform, if they have a new feature, right, they sort of like extensively push that. For example, when Instagram launched stories, it was definitely said that it's a copy of Snapchat, but the way it's basically picked up, everybody sort of like moved from Snapchat stories to now Instagram stories, right? From that, it moved to IGTV, and now it's also moved to Reels. Initially, not a lot of people started posting content there, but when they realized the algorithm and they realized that the reach was much better, when they sort of like used all of this, people sort of like now got used to it, right? So the algorithm definitely helps you increase your reach, if you sort of like leverage the newer features, because that's how the algorithm has been built. So while that's the case, it's extremely important for brands to also understand to leverage the latest features of every platform, because that will definitely help them to get the extra edge over other brands.
Right. Okay. So I think that's all questions we have. So yeah. Is there anything that you also want to add us and give us some small ideas for small people? Yeah.
Yeah, so I would sort of like just want to close out on today's webinar by saying that it's extremely important to have a custom made social media strategy for your brand. So it does, like, if you're signed up with an agency or if you sort of like have an in-house team, do realize that you cannot copy paste and use a social media strategy that is working well for other brands for your particular brand, because each brand is extremely different. They have their own brand voice and brand tonality, and also your target audience is extremely different, right? So while you can get inspired, it's extremely important to be original and be custom made and tailor made with your own social media strategy. Don't stop researching, don't stop looking out, and you'll always have like a new thing to do for your brand.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Srinidhi. That was really great. We really enjoyed your session. And that's it. No more questions. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Harshini. Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.